Okay.
So you can use the chat function to ask questions. And actually, because we don't have questions yet, I'm going to ask a question that I wanted to ask. And so well, it's kind of two questions, and it is related to, you know, gender balance. And I was wondering if you felt that you were in a position of disadvantage because because you are female in a community that is male dominated, and if you felt like you had to say no to something or give up to something for your career.
Yeah.
I know this is very personal.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So two parts. So as far as disadvantage, I think, you know, like there's the advantage and the disadvantage. I mean, you know, the reality of the situation is that there are times when someone says, well, we need to have one keynote that's a female, or we need to have one, you know, like, and so then, you know, can become an advantage when, you know, they are trying to make sure that there's balance. And, you know, so that's the advantage. But I will say that when I enter a new community, and it's all men in that community, it's harder. It's harder to have people, you know, like to respect right from the beginning. So if they all, you know, there have been 2 times so far that I could think of in the last like 5 years or so, where like it was all men, they all knew each other, and I was the female. And it took longer than I would like to, but not terrible. So my advice to anyone is like, just keep going, like just keep contributing, just keep saying what you want to say. Don't give up, because then eventually, you know, in this case, you know, these men that, you know, they knew each other, they didn't know me, and they were all male. You know, so for me to actually get to the point of breaking in to the group, you know, it happened. In all cases, it happened. So don't give up if you're in that circumstance. As far as giving up, you know, I think that, so I worked at IBM early in my career, and it, you know, it was a long time ago. There was like probably less focus on people having a better work-life balance than there is now. So I don't want to like say anything bad about IBM, because it's probably completely different now. But I think that from an academic standpoint, when you're trying to balance your family and your family responsibilities, like I found like no better career than being an academic, because, you know, we have such control of our schedules. You know, we're our own bosses, and we say what we, you know, for the most part, you know, what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? And that's control that of our lives that we have that most other fields don't have. So I feel like I use that. Like, you know, I've told the story that in my first, like when I worked for IBM, by the time I became a faculty member in 2000, I had a child in 1st grade, 2nd grade, and 5th grade. And I wanted to be able to use my flexibility to drop them off in the morning and pick them up at 2:30, and then like bring them to their karate and football and gymnastics and everything. And so for 10 years, 10 full years, I really did, like if someone said, can I meet with you at 4 o'clock? I would say like, let me check my calendar. No, I'm booked. How about tomorrow at 10? Because I left at 2:30 every day. I never told anybody that I was going to leave at 2:30 every day, but I did almost always, because they needed to be picked up from school. And then, you know, carted, and then I would go to football with my laptop and sit in the car or sit on the bleachers or wherever and manage my life that way. So like, that's the type of thing you just can't do in most careers. And like, I really had the attitude about it. Like I was getting tenure and I was doing that, of just having the confidence that like, if this doesn't work out, I can find a job. Like I'm going to have a job. Like I didn't have the fear that like if someone sees I'm doing this or something, like, you know, I'm not going to have a job. I always knew I'll have a job. This will be fine. Um, and um, and I thought, I'm going to wait until the first person tells me that I'm doing something wrong or that I'm not doing something I should be doing. And until that happens, I'm just going to keep managing my life this way. And it worked. And the key is do what you need to do. If you do what you need to do, then you'll have the flexibility that I think you need.
I think Alexander has a follow-up question.
Okay. How do you manage faculty meetings? Yes. So once a month, I had to figure out who was going to pick my kids up from school. But they were scheduled out the whole semester. So that was a case where, you know, I had a once a month problem. And so I relate to what you're saying there is, you know, there are exceptions. But I think that was the only exception really that I had to deal with. You know, any other time when someone wanted to have a regular meeting that was done after 2:30, I didn't say, I can't make it, I have to pick my kids up. I never said that. I just said, that time doesn't work for me. And everybody worked around it. Okay.
Yeah. Bashar, do you want to say something? Your question?
Well, yeah, I wrote the question, which is it frustrating to be asked these kinds of questions as the first two questions when you start? I initially thought it was just, yeah, so I was wondering if that was in itself an awkward, you know, I just didn't, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any comment on that?
Right. No, but I mean, you know, my reaction to what you're saying there is that what I just said applies to men as well as women. And, you know, I was doing that in 2000. It's 2020 for one thing. 20 years is a long time. So like men are much more, you know, participatory, but they were then as well. So like the flexibility that we have as academics applies to men and women. And, you know, just the main thing, get your job done and exploit the flexibility you have for the advantage of your kids and your family and yourself. Just get your job done and it'll all work out.
But presumably it doesn't always work out. Sometimes it doesn't because, I mean, have you noticed, well, I guess back to Liliana's questions. I mean, presumably it doesn't always work out for everyone for whatever reason.
Right.
Because of the issues that I think she was hinting at.
Right. So, I mean, there's always bad things that happen. Like, you know, it doesn't work out well, you know, always for all people. Like, you know, there's always unfair people. But, you know, the other example I have was when I did work for IBM and I was a manager, and back in the olden days, you had to, you know, at that time, a manager had to work 9 to 5 where there was flex time. And you could work 7:30 to 3:30 or 8 to, you know, like you know, you could move it around. And so when I had my oldest son, I just thought it's more important to me to pick him up early than to pick him up later. And I don't care if I'm a manager or not, like, you know, that I want that flexibility. And so, you know, at that time, it wasn't, I mean, you worked at least 9 to 5 if you were a manager. And so I went and I said, like, I don't want to be a manager anymore because I want to use flex time. And they said, you can use flex time. And so that was the case where I was public about my choices and it worked out. But the key, like truly the key is do everything that you need to do. And, you know, like you can't, like not, you know, my advice is don't try I mean, you know, just have to do a good job. And that if that means that, you know, I didn't work and, you know, I was at work at 8:30 to 2:30, 6 hours a day. So my job was not done when I left. And I had to go home and do the rest of my job. You know, when my kids went to bed or on Saturday morning, like, so it's, you know, you have to be flexible and work around your own schedule, but you need to get it done. And so, you know, in my experience, when when you can get it done, when you do get it done, then the flexibility works out. But of course, there can definitely be cases where things go bad.
I think you want to say something, or do you have any question? Because I see you commented.
Well, I'm just commenting. I missed your question, Liliana. So while I do think it's important that younger women do find out how us older women did
Yeah.
things.
Older women, who are you talking to?
I'm one of the honest ones.
Okay.
The women among us who have older children. How about that?
Yeah. No, of course I'm teasing. My sister did tell me this week that, and I haven't tried it, but Zoom has a facial enhancement feature. So
Oh.
I can't even
maybe I should have turned that on before.
I can't even use the Zoom backgrounds. It doesn't work in my house anywhere. Hairdressers open in Ireland until this week, so next week is the big day. So we've all these problems that we're putting up with. No,
Yeah.
I did miss the start, but my remark was that the first question you were asked, and I do agree that it is really important that younger women have to find out, is about your family life, which I think is kind of interesting in an open session.
Right, yeah.
That's all, and that's not to say that it shouldn't be asked, because I do think it is important that us women with older children,
Right.
we have made it to a certain level within our organisations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting what you're saying about the going home, because for me, I actually, I suppose, dealt with things differently. We're all allowed to do things differently, and my thing always would be to have very good childcare in place.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I was able to go into work from 9 to 5 or 9 to 5:30.
Right.
Always arose when the other half was supposed to collect the children, and I then got the panic phone call saying, "Where are the children collected?"
Yeah.
That would be, and for me then, what was really important was that I did have my evenings. So, it's different people do different things.
Right. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is flexibility of the academic life.
Mm-hmm.
This week, being
Yeah.
able to do whatever, having to get up at 1 o'clock in the morning or be up to listen to a good keynote or whatever. But it is flexibility of it.
Right. Yeah, but here's a question about boundaries, and I think that the boundaries between work and home, we're all really experiencing that now that we've been working at home for all these months, and it is important to have that boundary. But I would say when I was going through that time of my life, the boundary between work and home was less important to me than the ability to do what I had to do with my kids. And so at that point, it was okay for me to put the kids to bed and work from 8 to 11 p.m., which, means I don't have a firm boundary. That was okay for me. But, at a different time of your life, like right now, like I don't have kids at home that I need to take care of, then it's, I do have to actually establish that boundary. And that's something that, we all have to be working at right now as we're working from home.
I think Arosha has a follow-up question on this point.
Okay.
Arosha, if you want to unmute your microphone.
Thanks, Liliana. So I guess my question links to this, the advantage of flexibility, but the double-edged sword that comes with it, and whether you had any advice generally for academics to manage these boundaries better. Are there things you've done to plan your time, or how you plan your time between research, teaching, and the flexibility, those kind of things? That would be really interesting.
Yeah, and so I can't say that I'm perfect at it, but I don't know if you know of this book, Deep Work. Yeah, and so I read that book, I became inspired by it, and so if you haven't looked at that book, Deep Work, it's a fantastic book about, having focused time. And, the great thing about it was a New York Times bestseller. Everyone is reading it, but he's a computer science professor. And so he's in our field. He's an associate professor. I think it's George Mason. And if you look at his academic record, so Cal Newport is the author, and his academic record is just fine, like, you know, completely solid. But yet he has this other life, which is New York Times bestselling author. And he does research on productivity and focus. And, you know, what he says is he does that. Like, you know, he doesn't work weekends, and he works, you know, he shuts down his day 5 or 5:30, you know, and he shuts his day down and says, shut down complete, closes it up, you know, like plans out his next day, shut down complete, shut it, and go home and clear your head. And that you'll be much more energized the next day if you work that way. And, you know, I was very inspired by that book. And so I try to model that as much as I possibly can. And I am an early person. So like I get up early, I exercise, like, you know, before most people are getting started. I've already exercised, taken a shower, like I'm going, and sometimes I get on my own case and I'm like, you know, relax. It's like 8 a.m. Okay, so, you know, you haven't finished taking a shower yet, but it's 8 a.m. and you've already exercised. Like, give yourself a break. But what that does mean is, you know, by 5 or 5:30, I've put in a good solid day. And I do try to like shut the laptop off. You know, I work upstairs and then shut it off. It's and not downstairs with me the rest of the evening. And I do try to take the rest of the evening off. I see some of my students are on here, and I hope that they aren't like, what, is she kidding me? But I do try to tell them, you know, take the weekend off, stop, you know, like I try to instill in them that balance as well. You know, this book, Deep Work, but lots of other things will say it's really good for you and your brain and your productivity and your creativity and your energy if you actually can separate.
Yeah.
I think try to model that.
You know, linking to the students that are here, I think Danny has a question.
Okay.
That relates to advices.
The best advice I received.
Maybe Danny, you want to unmute your microphone if you want to ask the question directly.
Yeah.
He froze.
A good position to freeze in.
I absolutely second the deep work. It has made a profound impact on my life, and he has a lot of stories from computer science, so we will relate a lot to those.
Yeah.
And it's a phenomenal book. Has a lot of stories from IT and computer science. So I cannot highly recommend it. So the question was on advice, Laurie, and we all receive advice from people in our life, and it's been one of the like turning points in our life. Can you think about the person who gave you this such a turning point advice in your career, and how you were so happy that you followed this advice? But then also, I guess the opposite is it's maybe you don't have to name, but conversely, it's a negative thing that people follow. Oh, this is everyone was telling you should do this, you should do this, and then you did it, and then over the years you realize that it was not helping you be more fulfilled as a person.
Right. So my background processing is going to be on the bad advice. The good advice immediately came to mind, and that was one of my earliest managers at IBM. And so like I mentioned earlier, I worked at IBM a long time ago, and I actually worked at IBM. I don't know if you knew this about me, but I was in a software or industrial engineering group with Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, and some of the other people who have flowed with him, like Jeff Williams, and someone named Jackie Haynes. She's still at Apple now, and she was my manager. And back at that time, it was like, in order to be successful as a woman, like the feeling was you had to be tough. And so, I was, only a couple years out of college, but that was the message that I was getting. If you want to be successful, you have to be tough like the guys. And so she knew, like, that's not you. And so, she pulled me aside, and she was my manager, but she pulled me aside and said, you know what, you're here a lot of hours every day, and you need to be yourself. And if you're yourself, everything will be fine. And I let go. I like let go of the need to be a tough guy at that point. And everything did work out after that. Like, so when I was not being authentic, I was having much more trouble than when finally she said, just let it go and be yourself. So that was definitely the best advice I ever had. And let's see, the worst advice. Trying to think if anyone gave me any advice that I know. Here's some advice. I mean, I got it, and I guess I didn't follow it. But so about 5 years ago, not that I like aspired to do it, but I suddenly became the acting department head of computer science at NC State because of a vacancy. And so I had to, they asked me to step up and fill the position, at least temporarily, which turned into almost 4 years. But when I started to do that, like I like to wear dresses. And so I was wearing dresses. And I know that I'm turning these answers into very female answers, but so someone who I respect a lot said, you really should be wearing pants. And I thought about it and I said, no. And I didn't take it. Even though I respect that person a lot and he had given me a lot of great advice in my life. So I guess the lesson there is, if you get advice, reach inside yourself and see, like, does that resonate? Because nobody's perfect. When he said that to me, he was saying it with the best of intent. He wasn't trying to hurt me or anything. It was just his opinion. And it just didn't sit right with me. So that was the bad advice. All right, let's see.
So Mira has a question.
Okay.
Do you want to switch on your camera if you can? And
sure. I can do that. Can you see me?
Yes.
So Laurie, so I like this idea of deep work, and I've heard this before. And as I've gotten older, I too have, try to take more time off. But I still go back to when I was a junior faculty member, and there are many people here who are just starting out positions, and there's a lot of pressure on, or even a junior academic researcher in a company, there's a lot of pressure to get papers, get grants, and if everything's working well and we're getting papers and we're getting grants, then it's easier to say, I'm just going to work during these hours and I'm going to make sure I have this balance. But it's very difficult for people when they start getting rejections. I mean, so we know that, not every ICSE paper gets in, not every grant gets accepted. And so what's your advice for people on that, in that perspective? How do they balance this when they're really trying to succeed in those first couple of years? And in particular, I think the next year or two, with the way teaching is going to go, is going to be even more challenging to find the time to get your research, get grants, do things you have to do to succeed as an academic, so, or even in junior in research.
Right. Right. So, I mean, like there's the deep work perspective, and then another perspective. Like I watched this show on Bill Gates, and so if it's on some Netflix or something, and like so Bill Gates truly worked like 20 hours a day, 18 hours a day, like forever, and he's obviously successful. And like so when I hear things like that, or some some of the current stars, Elon Musk and whatnot, who work all the time, like I'm like, damn it, tell us you have balance. And sometimes people don't have balance and they're successful. But I think in the general case, like, the research, like deep work has a lot of research in it. And I've read other research as well. Deep work just happens to consolidate it. That in order to keep the creativity and the energy up, you have to break your brain. You have to take a break. And so, I would say if you're a junior researcher and things aren't going as well as you'd like, as far as grants or papers, rather than just muscle through it and work harder, is to take a step back and think about, like, why is this happening? What's happening here? How am I missing?
I mean, Laurie, is it also okay to say, sometimes you can't follow deep work? I mean, I think this challenges that I think we've been, because I've been at some of these symposiums recently, people have been arguing this is the way to go. And I remember back when I was a junior faculty, and there were times, there would be periods of 3 or 4 months when I just had to work
Oh, yeah.
massive hours, and it's okay to do that, because if everybody's telling us that we have to have this balance and we can't have the balance, it adds even more pressure. And so I think you have to realize things go kind of in a cyclical way, and sometimes you're not going to have a balance, and you have to manage to get through those times knowing that you can bring that balance back. It's just my personal feeling, but I just always worry when we're telling lots of junior people, just, you know, go home, have a nice work-life balance. And I still remember the pressure of being that junior person, and I'm not going to pretend that I had a really great balance when I first started. I could say now I have much better balance, but even now there are times, like probably right before that ICSE deadline, when I will lose that balance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you know, periodically anyone loses their balance. I bet even Cal Newport does from time to time. So like, you know, but you said 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months is one thing, but to say I'm going to have no balance from now until I get tenure, that's a different story. So like if you're going to take it for years and years, like, or longer, you know, like long periods of time, like that's when you can start to question things. And like I said, it's like when we get overloaded and everything, then we can stop seeing the perspective of like, what's going on here? Like, why am I missing the boat? Like, what's happening? How can I fix the problem? And, you know, I'll fully admit to being a meditator. And sometimes I, like, you know, couldn't say I don't have time. And then to me, and like, so 9 minutes, that's my magic, 9 minutes. First thing in the morning, 9 minutes. And so when I say like, I don't have time, I need to get that email or something like that, then I tell myself, you don't not have time. And in like, it's amazing, like you start your day with that, and like you know, it's not magic, it's your brain. You know, your brain is like, you finally are giving your brain a chance to tell you something important that's in there. And so like, I can't tell you how many times during that 9 minutes in the morning, it's like, that's it. And then like I have, this is the message for the keynote, or this is, you know, or even like, oh man, I forgot, I have to submit the something today. Like, so your brain is your friend. And if you like slow down, and you know, you can get the bigger picture and get the messages rather than just muscling through it. Like, I need to work 10 hours a day, I need to work 12 hours a day, and just, you know, helps you get some perspective.
And there may be different work styles and different kinds of people. So I think we just don't want to force people to fit into any specific type of work. For some people, maybe that, and I'm seeing somebody made a comment, and I'll let you answer it, that they like working those really, really long hours. That gives them pleasure, and other people may feel like they need more of a balance. So I think the message is any of them work as long as you can feel comfortable and get and manage to complete your work.
Absolutely. And like I mentioned Steve Jobs, or not Steve Jobs, Bill Gates. I mean, he worked like that forever. And if really, there's no judgment. If work is really a source of true joy for you, do it. It's only when it's actually wearing you down, you know, and you're getting discouraged at your results or something like that, then you know, take a look and see what you're doing and see if there's another way. But if it's true joy, and I know a lot of people who are like that, it's true joy. And then maybe that's why you're here, is to do that.
I think Bashar is a question.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess just wanted to change direction a bit to look at sort of career, well, not career changes, but just within a career. Maybe this is a mid-career type question, which is, I sort of noticed that maybe some years ago, maybe a decade ago, you moved into security from perhaps focusing initially on empirical work, and then the two are not independent, of course, but that there was a change. And I'm wondering if that was accidental, deliberate, opportunistic, and sort of if there were any challenges or difficulties. And I think from my observation, it was very successful. But of course, you know, people changing careers or changing directions can sometimes be for all sorts of reasons, and have variable outcomes. I'm just wondering if you could comment on that, and how you manage that, and how it went.
Well, I mean, I'll be completely transparent on the types of changes. So one part was, and you know, if there are any, you know, younger people here, this might especially relate to you. So like my PhD topic was in Agile software development and pair programming back in the day when this was truly emerging. And it was interesting to me because I worked at IBM, and so it was like the anti-IBM, and I was interested in it, but my advisor was really interested in it. And so like it became my topic really because my advisor was interested in it. And so, but I had other interests too. And so when I became a faculty member, it was not as much, it was empirical software engineering, it was quality and testing, which he had no interest in. So when, as a PhD student, I couldn't pursue those interests at all. And so like one switch came as I continued to pursue Agile, but I also brought in quality testing, empirical software engineering into that. And there was some overlap with that. Like, you know, as I morphed through that, there was an overlap. And then, you know, what also happened was, and this was say in the early 2000s, that in the United States, not as much in Europe and other places in the country, but in the United States, getting funding from the National Science Foundation for Agile just like wasn't happening. It's just not going to happen. And so, and even honestly, like places like ICSE were not accepting papers on Agile. Now they are, but in the early days, it was kind of tough because a lot of people, academics, rejected it, just flat out rejected it. And so that was a time where it was like, okay, so I can't get research money. My students are having problems getting papers accepted. And, you know, like, as much as I try to say like 98% of the time the reviewers are trying their best, like that was the case where I felt like the reviewers were kind of biased. And so then it was like, okay, so this isn't really working well. I can't put my PhD students under this because, you know, they're not having as much success as they could probably have. And so then I morphed my quality and testing stuff into security because it was opportunistic, to use your words, Bashar. But I was also truly interested in it too. Like I'm very passionate about security and keeping the world secure. So like all of those twists and turns, they, you know, happened gradually. And, you know, because you do have to prove yourself in something, particularly in the United States, to get grant funding. You can't just decide, hey, I'm a researcher in security now. Like you have to have papers in it. So you have to kind of morph yourself. So I did do some morphing, but all of those topics are still something that I do at least partially.
I mean, the reason I wanted to highlight it is because I think it's a really good example for people to look at and to see how you can quite legitimately have different bodies of work over time that are connected but are still different, and
right.
You can do that almost throughout your career, and that there is a way to manage it and to do it, which is yeah, that's
actually I just want to follow up on Bashar's point, because I just want to ask you, because the security community, it's quite a tough community,
right?
And I was wondering what were the major difficulties you have found in entering this community, and how you overcome them.
Right. It's still, I mean, I guess, you know, there was the Agile difficult community, and then now the security difficult. So maybe there's a trend of something that I do there. You know, I think that the key is in those to just keep finding like who will accept it, and then keep trying in the areas that don't accept it. Like when I'm telling you like things my Agile work wasn't being accepted. If you look at my publication record, I was getting papers published. They weren't in ICSE at the time, but like they were somewhere, and then those papers are cited. And similar with the security community, like, so the hardcore security community is gaining respect. So I've been doing security since 2004, so it's 16 years. You know, back in 2004, software engineering and security together, like they so rejected that. And little by little, you know, it's getting more and more. And, you know, so I in 2011 became the co-director of an NSA sponsored Science of Security Lablet. which, you know, then that was a big thing about like, that's hardcore security. And I was a co-director and NSA chose me. And so like, it's kind of like, oh, okay. You know, like, I think that people in the community were like, oh, really? Okay. And so like, you just have to kind of wait it out, publish where you can during those times, and then keep trying. And the thing is, like, you have to learn about those other communities and what is it, like, what are they, what are the problems that they're having? And I'll give a really enlightening example is that we were doing some work. I don't know if you know Jeff Carver, University of Alabama. He and I were doing some work on looking for, like, you know, we have 2 papers on it, and those 2 papers we had a lot of trouble publishing. And so what we were doing was taking, like, what is empirical software engineering, like the way we write papers in empirical software engineering, how does that look in security? And we actually went to the top security conferences and analyzed the papers and looked for the types of things in software engineering that are normal to have in a paper, and were they there? So, you know, the paper was about like establishing a scientific benchmark in security or something like that. And so in doing that, we analyzed all of the papers in like ACM, CCS, and IEEE Security and Privacy. And boy, did those people get mad at us for doing that paper. But the other thing that we learned, and this is like really important, is that when we looked at a paper and it was like, we tried this, we tried this paper. We classified that as a case study. I don't know, raise your hand if you think that sounds like a case study. Couple of raised hands. Well, for them, calling something a case study is like saying your baby's ugly. I mean, a case study, oh, that just means like you didn't even do any good research. It was okay, actually, when it was actually classified. They wanted to be an experiment. It's like, it's not an experiment though, right? But if we called it like, they would say it's an experiment. What's your sample size? 1. That's okay, right? And so it's just like speaking their language. So if you learn, if you're switching communities and you really actually take a look at how do they write. Here's another funny thing that happened. So I don't know how many years ago this was, let's say 5 or 6. And I was a holdout of using Microsoft Word and not LaTeX until LaTeX had a nice collaborative feature. Because when I work with my students, as they know, some of them are on here, I give 4 million comments. And so like Microsoft Word had a nice ability to add 4,000 comments. And at the time, LaTeX didn't. So I was a holdout. So here I was, the co-director of Science of Security Lab with $2 to $2.5 million worth of funding a year. 18 PhD students supported every semester from Science of Security. And I'm the lead of it. And this PhD student came up, and this goes to the, you know, the acceptance of software engineering and security. So this PhD student came up and said, we can tell you're not, we can tell, like not you look like, we can tell you're not a security researcher because it's evident you wrote this paper in Word. So here I'm like, hello, I paid for your PhD. Don't tell me I'm not a security researcher because, you know, it was a security. So, so anyway, it's those silly things. Like, that's such a silly thing. What is the editor that you're working in? But in that community, it's a bias. So they get, you know, that community, you submit a paper to one of their top conferences, and you can tell a LaTeX paper versus a Word, like you can tell it. And so for them, it's a negative like that. So what are the other signals? Like, you know, what are the other things you could be doing that cause you to not get accepted in a community? And sometimes they can be really, really subtle.
Can I do just a quick follow-up to that?
Sure.
I mean, again, in the sort of in the self-reflective mode, I sometimes like visiting other communities, not only just to enter theirs, but to see what we're doing wrong, not to get them to come to ours. and just you know, so maybe we can learn also how other people come to our conference and we say, but this is not an ICSE paper, this is not how it should have been written.
Yeah.
They should have called it a case study.
Yeah.
so it's, you know, it goes both ways, I guess.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like I'm giving the examples of them not accepting me, but how are we doing that? Yeah, so you have to be self-reflective. That's right. All right.
I think, Arosha, you have a question? I saw your hand raised.
Okay.
No, sorry.
Okay, so
Okay. So it looks like there's a long question from Puyan.
Yeah, hi Laurie. Thanks for great insights. I enjoyed it a lot. So my primary question was related to the other topic of work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to start with this implicit biases in different communities that you mentioned, because this is also interesting, right? At the end of the day, we all do science, right? It shouldn't really matter what terminology we use, right? I also seen that at ICSE in software engineering related communities, if people from other communities submit something, it's great. I see that the idea is great, everything is great, it's proper science, proper evaluated, but gets rejected because they don't have threats to validity. That's a stupid from my sense, but even our community does that, right?
Yeah.
So the others, right? I don't know how to deal with this frustration. I mean, I know many people have, but like these implicit biases in science, I mean, I don't know how to resolve that, but I guess we have to live with it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I appreciate your comment, and I actually got an email from someone, you know, who said, I would ask you this if I could in person. And they were talking about like justifying a research center in their university and similar kind of thing. It was about language, and so it's like whether it's threats to validity missing or, you know, like the example Bashar gave, like it is important, like the communication vehicles and the little signals to understand the community. And so like say that threats to validity. So like that was one thing, like in that paper with Jeff Carver, that in security, they don't really have a threats to validity section.
Yeah.
But if they submitted a really great paper to us, would we reject it for that? And maybe, you know, that's the case where we should say, well, we might not reject it. We'll say, you need to put that in, you know, like, so, you know, if you're on a program committee or something, like rather than, so you could be the one to fight to say, I'm sure they can put a threats to validity in the final if the rest of the paper is good.
Yeah.
As we welcome people into our community as well.
Yeah, exactly. Those fighters who promote. The other one that I wanted to follow up about is basically work-life balance, and this is huge paradox for me, as I mentioned, right? So I mean, I enjoy a lot, and I see like what Danny say, what you say, Bashar, and everyone, right? Even like Christian Kastner, my advisor, told me several times, right? You should balance work with your life, whatever, right? So I enjoy a few things, like, for example, I enjoy running, and I go for running for 2 hours every day. I love it. I get huge feedback out of it, and I cannot replace it with anything else. But besides running, I don't have any hobbies, right? This is my work. I love it. I love what I do. I enjoy. This is not just frustration for getting a paper, one new paper, right? No, it's not like that. Even many of my paper gets rejected, but I put more work because to do more great science. For me, it's paradox when I hear this work-life balance, honestly, because I cannot understand it, or maybe I'm outlier or I'm wrong in in many sense. So I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I think the main thing is if you're doing what brings you joy, then you'll keep your energy up. And it sounds like you are. Like if you're running for 2 hours a day, and I'm a runner as well. I mean, you can get great, and it's moving meditation, right? You can get lots of great ideas. And so like if you're filling your day with things that bring you joy, it's perfect. Yeah, I wouldn't judge yourself. Yeah.
I think, Bara, I'm not sure if you have a question or it was just a comment.
Yeah, I think it was a comment, but it was related to this, like really giving a pause at a good time. And I was just adding a comment that I think we forget to celebrate what we achieve, and
Yeah.
it's partially because we sometimes get maybe also in a general we get a gradual acceptance, right? So it's not that big surprise when we finally actually can celebrate, and we are already running for another deadline. So this is also good, just a thing I wanted to add to the comments, that we should really like pause and celebrate when we achieve something.
Absolutely. Yeah, great reminder. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think Bashar has a question.
Listen, I'm only putting the questions in case anybody else does. So if somebody else wants to ask, I was just wondering how chairing the steering committee for ICSE was turning out to be. It's quite a challenging job, because it involves lots of people with very different views sometimes about how an entire community should move, and you making. Yeah, so the consequences of getting it wrong are significant. You've had to reorganize an entire conference under a huge amount of pressure.
Right.
I'm just
Yeah.
wondering how that worked out.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the questions about some of the steering committee chair, and these were, crazy times, but I think that, like, what I'd say is that everyone, like, on the steering committee and really in the software engineering community, they're like, like positive, like everyone, if anyone's on here in the whole virtualization committee, I mean, that came out of nowhere and caused people tens and tens and tens of hours of work, and people stepped up and did that. I think that, one of the things that I'd say within the steering committee is sometimes, there's 38 people, 38 opinions and divergent. And so, what we had to do at different times was, like, we started like with the whole steering committee, and it's like, okay, all right, subgroup, time for a subgroup. And we called it the Emergency Response Committee, a smaller group. It's much easier to get people to agree when there's 8 people and not 38. But, all in all, like, we have different subgroups. We have Journal First and Open Access and, like a whole bunch of the groups, and like people step up and they do the work, and everyone's committed to the good of ICSE. We have the new committee with FSC, ASC, and ICSE, and so like everyone has their heart in the right place. So, not too bad.
Then you have another question.
Oh, I'm muting myself. Okay. So everyone is talking about the good old days and before the pandemic. And I think we are all missing meeting with people and seeing people face to face. But there are some unique things that we are all learning, and we wouldn't have learned otherwise. Like the crisis, like forces us to stop what we are doing and to reconsider major things in life and to do them differently. So Laurie, can you share with us some of those things that you are learning now about you, or about humanity, or about others, or some activities or something new that you are starting, new habits or other things that you are using this opportunity of being locked down to further grow yourself and people around you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a couple things, come right away to mind. One is I wasn't sleeping enough. And so, like, that's one thing. And that, that went on from probably the day my son was born 30 years ago. And then, like, this was now, like, you don't have a commute. And so, like, I actually sleep at least a half hour, if not towards an hour more a day. And I need it. Like, I am still setting an alarm even with that extra time. And so that's one thing. And, there's sleep, there's a lot of value to sleep. So everybody on this call, think about that. Should you be sleeping more? That's one thing. And also, I was traveling like a crazy person. And I think I won't ever get back to that again. Like, I'll be more selective. And, again, other people can think about, like, that. And I do value, I'm missing each and every one of you in person. now, but like, you know, how about those other 12 trips I would have taken between March and now and so that's something. You know, those are two lifestyle types of things, but you know, I mean, I do miss seeing my students in person, and so I value that more, the in-person, but I don't know. And how about you, Danny?
I'm losing weight. So I had the same excuse like you said with travel, and I've been traveling like 90 to 160 days, and it was extremely hard to take good care of my diet, like and also the exercise. But now I don't have any more excuse. I haven't traveled anywhere for 4 months, so I'm much more careful with the quantities and how I eat, and enjoying every. I'm eating slower, so 25 minutes, which is unheard of before. Like I never had like 25 minutes to eat a meal, but now I'm enjoying every bite, and I'm losing weight because of that. So and the other thing that I'm doing, well, this is just one on the personal related to the fact that we are locked and we are safe at home and we don't have to travel. So
yeah, that's good.
I think Bara, you also have a question.
Yes. My question is about actually visibility of research, and I would like to ask you about like on 2 levels. So I think I would actually be interested in your personal opinion about, because like what I feel is that even good research nowadays just gets lost, and the like crazy amount of research we see around. And what do you advise your students to actually keep their research visible and to actually reach the communities and people who might benefit from it? That's like more like personal level. And then regarding ICSE and visibility of ICSE, because as we were talking about a steering committee, I mean that like nowadays also conferences are trying to like outgrow the academic world and try to be impactful, right, outside their bubble. And like, do you think about it in the context of ICSE, really like being visible and being impactful outside the academic world? So it's 2 questions actually.
Right. Yeah. And so, I mean, you know, one thing that I have on my webpage for my PhD students, I'm not good at actually, you know, really following through with them. But like what I'm saying, the guideline is that when you're done, publish in like IEEE software, communications at ACM, somehow get it out of the academic literature into practitioners. And so that's one bit of advice. But I do agree that we need to get into the practitioner world, like, you know, to impact the practitioners, but also society. So I know, Bashar, you asked about the software engineering and society track, but like getting it so that we are helping, we're not just solving a problem. And so in general, the people we try to impact are other software practitioners. And so trying to bring them into ICSE as much as possible. That's why we brought them into the steering committee, so we can find out more about what should ICSE be doing to be more attractive to practitioners. But then even society, like the software engineering and society track, I do think is an important track. Just as an aside, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I did a keynote at ICSME, and I analyzed the papers in the software engineering and society track over the last 3 years, I think it was. And so something we do in our papers, as my student knows, we write a research goal. The goal of this paper is to aid stakeholder to, and then their problem by research approach. Like, so it's a template. And so Sarah Elder's on here. She helped me with this analysis where we analyzed the software engineering and practice papers and looked at the paper and put whatever they did into that format. And, you know, I'd have to pull up my keynote. I want to say 80% of the time when we put it in the goal, the goal of this paper is to aid software practitioners to blah, 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 you know. And so I would challenge that in the software engineering and practice track, that we don't just help software practitioners, but we help society with their problems. So beyond ourselves. because society has a lot of problems that we can help.
I think we have time for maybe last question. Fanny, you want to ask a question? Can you unmute your microphone?
Hi, Laurie. For me, it's a pleasure and honor to get to know you, because I have read some of your work, and indeed your work inspired for my PhD topic, which is related to logging in software systems.
Right.
One of your papers is called "Log Your Crude: Design Principles for Software Mechanism." I think you know. Just I am very curious to ask advice from you, like, which is your advice about logging in software systems, and some advice you can tell me? Or
yeah, so I mean, you know, the angle that we took on, you know, that my student who worked in logging, and I did ask, there was one paper that I listened to this week at ICSE about logging. So logging is typically for debugging, and actually Leanna brought me to one of her workshops, and so what we really tried to do is say logging is for forensics, and it's not currently, but it's really important for forensics. So you know, when a breach occurs, who did it? What are the traces? And I would say that, you know, when that student graduated, we didn't continue that work, but I still think the problem is there. Even, you know, the ICSE paper that I think it was on Tuesday, you know, no mention of breaches or forensics. So I think you can carry that mission on to try to get it to be that, to just continue to raise awareness that the logging really needs to detect traces of who did what.
yeah, you know what, in your paper you said very interesting things, that in the, for example, in the medical area, sometimes the people are consulting private information, and there is not log that detects that, even for just consulting, and it's very important.
Right. Yeah. So you want to know, like, I wonder if my neighbor has diabetes. I'll go check it, you know, and then no one knows you did, or change somebody's blood type or something minor like that, and no traces. Yeah, it's a problem.
I know we are out of time, but I really want to ask a very last question.
Sure.
So because we were talking about impact in society of software, and I just wanted to understand, what is your advice on doing impactful research?
So, I mean, what I would say, like, you know, in that area, and it's something I have to ask myself also, and do myself also. So I'm not just criticizing it. It you know, made me think about it in our own research group, is to think about, who are you doing this research for? It's not just to get an incremental improvement over somebody else's paper, but what is the problem somebody has? And increasingly that problem could be society. You know, climate change, there's a whole bunch of things that, you know, and I'm willing to release the data set Sarah and I did on the papers from those tracks, where we did change, you know, the words. I mean, there was a couple of papers that had no actual problem and no actual stakeholders. So we do papers like that too. And so just think about who is going to benefit, you know, and how increasingly can software engineers help society directly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think before we go, thank you so much, Laurie, for your time and for your advices. I really enjoyed the session.
All right, well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Before we leave, please switch on your camera, and I'm gonna do a group picture. Now this is becoming a tradition. So we are doing it in all the events. So please switch on your camera. I'm gonna do it in 2 parts, because I don't have a high resolution to fit everyone in my screen. So, okay. So I'm just gonna remove the chat. So when
very good, look good.
you do.
I know that there are features to improve your
Give your best virtual smile.
I'm gonna look for them.
Make me
Okay. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm gonna do the second part. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy
you,
the rest of
Laurie.
ICSE.
Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
How
Thanks.
do you do
Bye-bye.
this clapping feature?
Yeah, I'll have to try that next time.
In
Where-
reactions. In
Oh, yeah.
reactions.
Now you
Yeah.
tell me. Okay. here we go.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
And thanks,
Bye.
Liliana, for moderating.
Yeah, thanks, Liliana.
I take a picture also. Bye.
Bye.
Hi, Danny. Danny, are you still here? I saw your message.
Yeah, yeah. So we
My
are
big
doing a.
problem is that it's going to be 4 a.m. my time.
Oh yeah, that's bad for you.
So I would like to attend, but I don't think it's gonna be. I can do it.
Yeah. I forgot that you are in Leron, Ireland, right?
Sorry, I
Yeah.
can't.
That's okay. I wonder if you should take recording, like when you ask people to take a recording, do they object? Do they?
No one. We didn't have objection, so I think it was okay. I can stop recording now.